betrayal, lust for power. It will be their downfall. And I fear Talon's problems may soon become the world's problems.
Hey guys, my name is Shermy. I have a lot of different names and I just really like lore. The hero banner that we got earlier this year at the Overwatch Spotlight has finally been updated. We got some new additions here, of course being D.mon and Xion, but there are two other characters in this silhouette who have been drastically updated. Of course, these are the next two heroes coming out. I have a lot of ideas on what has happened to these two, and maybe who they're gonna be, so we're gonna be summarizing all of that in this video. However, I do want to say before we get too deep into this, I don't think any characters have been swapped or replaced or anything like that. Development takes a really long time on this stuff, and these characters have probably just evolved to fit the story and also their general feel a lot better. So that's what I'm going to be going into this with. Anyways, don't forget to like and subscribe, as we're going to be doing a lot of speculation pieces and a lot of updates on the new season over the next couple weeks, as well as just general lore. I have some fun stuff in the pipeline, and if you guys like this kind of lore stuff, it'll be cool to see you around. Let's get into it by talking about the first of these two silhouettes. This one being, of course, the Omnic Detective, who I still believe is going to be the first one of these two coming out. So here's an image of the before and after from Overwatch Cavalry. Thank you, Cavalry, for this. We can see that the basic design has remained the same for this one. Of course, this just means that he's probably still going to be an Omnic. I don't think they would change that about him at all. That was something that was there from the very beginning and as something that was really what people latched onto with this design, so he's still going to be that. However, his dots on his forehead seem to have been either pushed up or removed. I'm leaning more towards them pushing up the dots on his forehead to be under the hat. Way back in the day, they talked about Zenyatta's silhouette and said that it was kind of hard to make other Omnic characters to differentiate from that, so that's probably going into why Xion's dots and the Omnic Detective's dots are hidden away. That was way back in the day though, around, well, the start of Overwatch 1, so that design philosophy could have changed. However, that's probably why the dots are not here. Another thing that we can talk about with his face is, of course, the hat or the fedora. It seems like it's kind of meshed into his face or kind of just general area around his head. This, I think, is just going to be a more sci-fi or futuristic hat now going forward. Maybe this is going to be a piece of clothing that was made specifically for Omnics, and we'll get to see that with this character. Omnics haven't really talked about clothing and kind of their culture and identity yet, so this character is probably going to be the one to really spotlight that. Moving down his design, we do see that on his shoulders, he's got more shoulder pad-like stuff now. This, of course, I think is just going to be going back into the sci-fi aesthetic, making it really hone in on him being more futuristic than he originally was. Now we get to the weird part of him. Behind Domina's legs, he used to have a cane. However, now he's holding what appears to be a gun. This is something that people have already pointed out Xion's original design had as well. She was holding like a weapon in the air, so he's probably going to be maybe a support if I had to guess, and this pistol will be his primary weapon, with the cane being his secondary weapon. If you look at the full image, you can see behind Sierra, he still has either the cane or some type of futuristic sci-fi staff. It's really hard to tell, but I do think he's going to be keeping that just in his other hand. Going down with this as well, I think this is going to be the core parts of his kit. This weapon and then the cane, kind of like a back and forth between the two. A lot of the newer heroes have usually two things to their kit that really stand out. Xion's pistols and her bike, Sierra's gun and her drone, so it makes sense that the detective would probably have that as well. The rest of his silhouette has relatively remained the same. You can see a little bit of the cape or the kind of cloak he's wearing, or, well, whatever it is, the piece of clothing it is, has kind of evolved to be a lot less curved and more angular. This is something that we know Omnics just kind of have in their kind of design philosophy. A lot of Omnic's base design is obviously very angular, very triangular in some aspects, so that makes some sense to me, just kind of giving more cadence to him still being an Omnic. Now, who could this hero be? Well, because of their design change, specifically with something on their head that I didn't mention yet, people have begun to assume he could be a returning character. And that could be, well, a few people. So on his head, you can see he now has two ear-like, kind of almost angular things out there. This is something that in a lot of media, robots tend to have, just kind of some cool little thing on their head, but this kind of thing does bring up a couple characters in the lore. Now, depending on angle, this could be a couple different things. Firstly, of course, this is the one that's been making rounds the most, and has a little bit of evidence to it. This could be Link 17 from Zarya's comic Searching. So, this is a character from way back in the day that I've talked to death about a couple times now, but they are a character people have wanted for a really long time. Lynx is a hacker, and last time we saw anything of them, they were actually bested by Sombra in that comic. They assumed the Sombra Collective was a group and not a person, and they got to meet Sombra, and their story was kind of left open-ended. They've been something people want out of a hero for years, and you can kind of see that those kind of things on their head are very similar to Lynx's ears. So maybe that could be it, and Lynx is wearing a helmet. I could see that being the case in some ways. Another thing I want to point out with this is, of course, in the Vendetta D.mon hero trailer. In D.mon's hero trailer, we get to see that Vendetta segment, and here we get to see it says Omnic L7. I'm not sure exactly what this means. If this was a Lynx teaser, I feel like they would have said Omnic L17. However, it is something I wanted to point out in cadence for Lynx. Now, all of this combined, I'm not entirely sold this is Lynx still. A thing with these silhouettes, and something I mentioned before, is I really doubt the characters themselves would change like this. Meaning, if they had created a character originally to fill these silhouettes, I doubt they would just change that character to be Lynx in, 5 months. However, this isn't entirely impossible, just something I wanted to bring up as kind of, well, illogical in a sense to me. And speaking of, let's get into our next candidate for who this could be. And this one being a favorite of mine and something I've seen making the rounds, Case. Case, of course, is the main villain of the London Calling comics. He was trying to basically enact a human omnic war in London, and the last time we saw him, he was running away from Tracer. There has been nothing on him since the London comics came out, all the way back before Overwatch 2, and because of those little dots on his head, or those little arrow things, it does kind of paint the idea that maybe this could be him. Depending on how you look at this, this could be his ears and also his, well, like I said before, those things on his head. He could be facing the camera instead of Lynx kind of looking to the side, so maybe that's it. As well, the last thing he used as a weapon was a pistol of some kind, something like this Omnic detective is assumedly going to have. Now, a big thing against him is the dots on his head. Case has 4 dots on his head, and the original Omnic detective silhouette does not have 4, he has way more, so once again, I don't believe this is going to be Case. However, I did want to bring that up as something it could possibly be. Now, the last major lore character that this guy could be is, of course, Maximilian. I doubt this one the most, however, I've seen some people speculating on it, specifically because of the cheek shape. If you look at the cheek shape of this Omnic, it's very strikingly similar to Max's basically concept art from back in the day. Comparing the two, it does kind of keep that same angular perspective, however, the biggest factor against Max is his prevalence in the lore, and how the developers have said they're not going to be making him a hero. I doubt they would change that, especially because of how important he is to the overall story. Maximilian is a reoccurring character in the entire Talon storyline. He was really important to Freya's story, he was especially important to Vendetta's rise. I just doubt that he would become a hero now. But then again, I didn't think we would ever get D.mon, and we did, so yeah. It's always possible, but highly unlikely. With those 3 candidates out of the way, and me not really thinking it's any of them, who do I think this is gonna be? Well, if we take a look at the entire lineup this year, this lineup has mainly been new characters. We've had a couple lore callbacks, such as Shion being the leader of the Hashimoto, and Domina being the VP of Vishkar, and of course Emery and Jetpack Cat as our big lore callbacks here, but for the most part, these characters haven't been characters we know. They've been filling niches that we haven't had before, so I still think the Omnic Detective is not going to be a returning character. I do think he's probably going to be a new Omnic in the Overwatch world. Now, where exactly is he going to fit into everything? Because Vendetta's plans have shifted and now she's going to be using the EMP on a continental scale, I do think the chances of an Omnic-focused storyline have kind of risen. An ongoing thing in the Overwatch world is the prevalence of EMPs and these kind of devices being used on Omnics. I mean, look at King's Row. You're literally delivering an EMP to the final point. So, with that in mind, I do think Vendetta's plan is going to affect Omnics in some way. Maybe this isn't going to be the only reason she uses this, but it's going to hurt them, and this character is probably going to be called, or maybe works with the IJC, aka the International Justice Commission, to figure out where this EMP is gone. This could all be leading to a big culminating moment in Season 6, where Vendetta uses the EMP, we get the other hero, and the detective was too late to stop it. However, an alternative thing that I've seen making the rounds as well is maybe this character could be working with Doomfist. Doomfist's story was picked up again in Season 3, where he basically was, well, brought back. The world now knows, or at least we know in the real world, that he's alive. So it would make sense to carry that storyline on with a new hero this year, building up into a culmination next year. Maybe Doomfist has called on the detective, an old friend of his, or, well, has just hired him, to help him keep an eye on Vendetta. Maybe Omnic L7 from that D.mon hero trailer is the detective, and in fact, this entire time of us thinking it's Lynx, no, it's a different Omnic with an L name. These are all very plausible to me, but there's just not enough information to lock anything down yet. Personally, I'm still on the IJC group, where I think he's going to be working with the IJC to figure out what Vendetta's doing with the EMP. That just seems like way more sense to me, and it feels like that will be culminating in a very important null sector thing next year. But that's speculation on my end. So, yeah, a lot of thoughts on this guy, but let's move on to the other new silhouette, because this one is even harder to pinpoint, really. So, with this other silhouette, thank you again, Overwatch Cavalry, for supporting and giving a side-by-side comparison here. We have two designs, and the original being on the left, and of course, the new one being on the right. Now, the original design on the left gave off a very null sector feel. You can see the little crystals, and that's kind of something in a reoccurring thing with null sector's theming. A very slim and angular body, the robotic legs, and of course, the kind of almost null sector Ramatra themed kind of clothes in a sense, and the bulky shoulder pads like Ramatra. Now, in the new design, this one is most 100% a human. I don't know if they would have changed anything about this character, making them a robot into a human. I don't think that's the case at all. Maybe this character was always going to be a cyborgish thing, and they decided to switch to a full human aspect, but that's what I'm going to bank on here. This character is assumedly going to be a human thanks to their hair, their silhouette, and the loss of their kind of robotic feet in a more traditional human sense. So that's something that we need to point out first. Knowing this character's most likely human, there's really only two characters in the entire lore I can think of off the top of my head to who this character could be. The first one being Hivemind. Now, Hivemind has been a reoccurring character for whoever this could be for a really long time now, but I've seen a lot of plausible evidence, especially after Vendetta took the EMP, mainly because, well, Hivemind is a really, really old lore reference. They were a character in Project Titan, and one of their abilities was an EMP-related thing. Well, Vendetta just stole an EMP, so it would make a lot of sense if she was breaking a certain character out of prison. Why would Hivemind be in prison, though? The only thing we know about Hivemind is they intercepted a United Nations meeting where they were trying to steal some important data. Here, they were holding every one of these world leaders hostage, and Reinhardt and a bunch of Overwatch was tasked with stopping them. Inside, Reinhardt basically charged ahead, breaking into the building, going against protocol, and let Hivemind get away. But he did end up saving everyone inside. Because of this, Reinhardt was forced to retire, so it paints a really interesting dynamic between these two characters, and that's something that a lot of the new characters have had. They usually have a dynamic with at least one hero going into the year. Sierra, of course, being the weirder one of this batch. Sierra, you could say, is Pharah for the Overwatch Undivided callback, but also could be with Emery. Anran had Wuyong, Jetpack Cat had Brig, Mizuki had Xion, Domina has, well, all of the Vishkar characters. I feel like this character has to be connected to someone, and it could be Reinhardt. That would be a pretty cool way to kind of tie all this together. However, another idea for this character is, of course, that they could be Kendra Woods, aka Sierra's mom. The only thing that's really going for this is this new character's silhouette has a striking familiarity to Kendra Woods' design from Sierra's comic. Specifically, the hair. Now, the hair is kind of done in the same way, but also they have drones flying around them, or like little boomerangs. So with that, Sierra had a drone. Maybe there's going to be a parallel and connection between the two here. I could see that being something that they go with, and it would be a nice capstone to the year, making this Kendra Woods. We start with Sierra and we end with her mom as a hero. That is where I think things would culminate in a really nice and satisfying way, and it would make more sense why Sierra got added when she did. Cause, well, it wasn't as important as it has been now. Under the just general design and some things I noticed with that as well, the design of this character, of course, has replaced the gun or whatever that was with a staff. Now, we only have a couple characters with staffs, and most of them are supports, so I'm going to be banking on this character being a support. The drones have changed from a gem shape to more boomerang-like. I kind of talked about this already, but I do think this is probably going to be in parallel to Sierra a bit. Maybe that's why this has changed. The most important thing about this silhouette, though, is the clothing itself. Now, you might be wondering, why is the clothing the most important part? Well, this clothing has actually been seen in-game before, on Neon Junction. Here, we get to see some clothing set up in a shop, and one of them is this, or assumedly this. They have the same kind of spiked neck area, and they also have the same kind of shoulder piece there. So it's looking like this was kind of a subtle hero teaser in a sense. With that in mind, that opens up a whole lot of ramifications about this being an entirely new character itself, but that part is probably the hardest thing to point down at the moment. The detective and, of course, this character have to combine to somehow connect to the prison, which is going to be the next Overwatch map, the Icelandic prison, so this has to be a culmination of all of this stuff. I don't know if this person would be an escapee, but maybe they're going to be working with Vendetta to break someone out, and then that hero would be the first one next year. Or alternatively, they are being broken out, and the detective is trying to stop them. I don't really know where this character's story is going to be going. I think this one is by far the hardest of the two, so I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on them. But overall, these are my thoughts on both upcoming heroes. A lot of speculation in this one, and a lot of, well, not a lot of concrete stuff. This is all stuff that I've been speculating on after these silhouettes got revealed and things I've seen online, so yeah. What are your guys' thoughts on both these silhouettes? Who are you more excited for? And of course, what do you guys think these characters are going to become when they release? I always like reading your guys' comments, and I see every single one, so yeah. Anyways, that's all from me, and I'll see you guys next week when we start delving deeper into the season's story.